Hi, I'm Ethan Wong, and today I'm here with Jessica Love. So tell us a little bit about what kind of writing you do, maybe what other stuff like art or etc.
Sure. So, um, I I came to be a published writer because I made a picture book called Julian is a Mermaid. That was the first book that I made. And when I created that book, I was actually working as an actor, which was my main um, kind of career path for about 15 years. That's what I was doing. I was living in New York and doing plays. Um, but I had this idea for a story, and I'd always done visual art, painting and drawing alongside theater. And I started working in my spare time on this story, but I started writing it visually with pictures, sort of the way that like maybe a screenwriter storyboards um, a script. That's kind of the way that my writing process works. It's very visual, and it comes to me in images first, and the words for me tend to arrive last. Um, so that's kind of a rough overview of the way I came to this work.
There's a lot of stuff in there which I kind of want to get to later, but
Okay.
first I'll ask a broader question to kind of gently get us into it, which is for you, what is the kind of when you say that the idea for the book developed, what does that kind of look like in terms of what inspires it, or what kind of is your thought process as you're getting these kinds of pieces picked up towards actually getting that book finished? I know you already talked a little bit about the storyboarding element.
So I think it's always different when you're talking about the first thing you make versus working within working as a more established artist within a career. And I think maybe the analogy of like a band's first album isn't a bad one because you have all this time when you're working on your first thing where nobody's watching, nobody cares what you're doing, where you can kind of titrate your idea, pouring it back and forth between vials and refining it. And there's no timeline, there's no one waiting for you to finish, and there's no expectation of what the thing is supposed to feel like or look like once it's done. Um, and so I think there's something very precious and special about that time because in some ways you're sort of figuring out how you like to work as an artist. Um, and then once you start if it works and your thing comes out, and you're lucky enough to get to do it again, it's like you try to apply that same magic, but it's a very different thing to do it once there are eyes on you. Um, I think Tennessee Williams said something like, "The best place to write is somewhere where nobody knows you and there's good swimming." And I think there's something true to that. There's something really useful about feeling invisible as an artist and getting to be kind of this lingering ghost that gets to take as much time as they need um, to make the thing that they want to make. I don't know that that answered your question at all. I think I think I took a hard left at some point. Did that answer your question at all?
I think we kind of got into another subject, which is kind of the expectations of being someone who is starting new, what it's kind of like to start anew. But I think my original question was about kind of how did you get inspiration for that first book? How did you kind of
Mm,
see things in the
right.
world that inspired that?
Oh, I remember why I started talking about this. Right. I think, again, this has to do with sort of the magic of your first project, which is that in some ways you're storing up all of these little moments and things that have inspired you or have given off a little spark, and you don't really realize that you're putting them all into this combinator or stew or whatever metaphor you want to use. But then once once that initial inspiration takes hold and you start working, you realize it's connected to all of these other things that you've been sort of unconsciously thinking about and mulling over for years. Like for me with Julian as a mermaid, I was thinking about for like a couple years around when I started working on this book, I was thinking about gender, summer, water, um, what the way that sort of seeing ourselves mirrored and reflected back teaches us about ourselves, the profound idea of being seen for who we really are, um, the ways in which we perform who we are, and how costuming and dress up are sort of a rehearsal for that expression of self. Anyway, it was all of these different things that I hadn't really realized I wasn't thinking about them in a formal way. They were just always sort of on my mind. And then once I had kind of the container of this source of inspiration for this story and this character, all of these ideas suddenly had a human face. And I realized the way that they kind of tied into this one character. But the way that that first idea manifested for me was very clearly, and this is usually the way it works for me. I saw this character, this little boy, and his grandmother sitting on a subway train going somewhere. And there's something about the subway, the train, public transportation in general, as a kind of magical portal. The doors open and you see something you've never seen before. You encounter a person, or it's the most alive part of a city in some ways. It's like its blood or its arteries. Anyway, that image for me was the first source of inspiration, and from that image everything else kind of flowed. But that's the way I tend to work. It comes with kind of a dream image first.
Yeah. Something of that is pretty similar to the way I think I've written poetry. It's just this idea of you have a catalyst for something out in the world or something that's immediate. The immediacy of it is what gets you into the writing. But once you start writing, you've compiled ideas in your head for a long time. And I think what I've heard a lot of people say might be useful is actually physically compiling those things down into lists, like just writing out when you feel slightly inspired by something, or noting it down wherever you can, so that once you really get into that phase of you've been struck by that immediacy, you'll have everything there for you.
Totally.
So yeah,
Agree. Hard agree.
yeah. And kind of I think you touched on this when you talked about how putting on costumes is performance, but I'm pretty interested in how you think your other kind of disciplines have affected the way you write or the way you do art or anything actually.
Yeah. I think, it's not, I mean, picture books specifically are interesting in that, like, a lot of former actors go on to write picture books. Not as many tend to like do a full career pivot, but it's the kind of thing where everybody's got an idea for like, oh, I have an idea for a children's book. And I think there is something unique about the overlap between um, theater theater specifically and picture books. Some of my favorite illustrators, like Edward Gorey, and Maurice Sendak, they worked in the theater either as set designers or um, costumes. Often, I think Maurice Sendak talks a lot about like when he was working on whenever he would be working on a book, he would be listening to a specific opera sort of obsessively. I think there's something about the the kind of frame around the book that feels reminiscent of the frame around a stage. There's a freedom, there's a thing that your eye does when it's reading specifically like a picture book that reminds me very much of my favorite kinds of plays, which is, so like when you're watching a movie, the director and the cinematographer are really deciding for you what is important about the story and where your eye is supposed to go. We'll zoom in really close on like a hand on a doorknob, and then we understand that like the story is about this person hesitating to leave or whatever. But with theater and with um, picture books, there's this kind of freedom that your eye has to follow whichever storyline you're interested in. And if the story is good, my favorite kinds of stories have several things going on at once, and you can kind of pursue whichever thread is tugging at you. But the thing that I love about that is that it makes it, sorry, there's a really loud blue jay in my yard. It makes it possible for this kind of harmonic multivalence to happen, where like way in the background of this painting or stage picture, you have one character doing this that relates to someone deep in the foreground having this totally different experience. But it allows for, I think, a much wider sense of human experience all happening at the same time. And that to me is what's really exciting about both of those mediums. I think the other thing I would say is I'm using the same tools as an illustrator that I used as an actor, to get inside of a character and illustrate their experience. I'm asking myself, like, where in my body, where in this person's body are they scared? What part of their body are they self-conscious about? Where do they carry their anxiety? What are they feeling? Are they feeling brave in this moment or afraid? Where is their, it's all the same questions. And I find that when I'm drawing, especially like a sort of fraught emotional moment, I find that I have to make the face that the character is making with my face. Not that I'm looking at it in the mirror, but my face just does that to understand what is happening with the character. And I read this really interesting thing about mirror neurons and how there was this study done about women who've had, or people who've had a great deal of Botox in their face, paralyzing certain muscles and making it impossible for them to like fully reflect back whatever face the person they're in conversation with is making. That's something that we do as humans to like, you, Ethan, are sad, and my face kind of reflects back that sadness. And what's crazy is it's actually in my making that face that my brain understands what you're feeling. If I can't mirror your face, my brain isn't getting that physical experience of what you're experiencing. It's like this very deep empathy mechanism that I find is kicking in when I'm drawing. Anyway, that was a long answer.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense that everything you kind of do converges in certain places.
Yeah.
And I feel that once you kind of get attached to one field, it's a lot easier to start other fields by applying the knowledge you've gotten from that previous field rather than feeling like you're starting at back from ground zero. And I think that's a
I
big
think
part
that
of it too.
I think you're so right. I really do. I think that's such a smart way of looking at it. And it also means that like no time is lost or wasted. It's just
Yeah.
redirected. Yeah.
And I think something I want to touch on before we kind of close out is, as someone who is very much familiar with the process of getting a first project out there, of kind of entering the world of a certain field, would be your advice for people who want to do kind of the same thing? What are some lessons you picked up?
Mm, that's a great question. I think I would say, I mean, there's a lot of like practical advice, all of which you can Google, um, about, you know, how to get your chapbook published, or like how to get, I mean, all of that is that it's always the same advice. But I think I would say make sure when you're ready to start sharing your work with people and get it, and you're ready to start that like long long journey of trying to get it out in the world, because it is long and discouraging, for almost everybody, and that's so okay. I think the key is making sure that your work is at a point where when you read it or when you look at it, you are genuinely excited to share it with other people. Like, don't be afraid to go back and revise and revise and revise until it is at that point where it's like it has some durability and can, and even if it gets rejected again and again and again, you know that there is something there, and that's going to give you a little bit of extra fortitude and strength to keep, you know, your head down into the wind and keep submitting it, keep sharing it. um I think sometimes people want to, you know, they get their initial idea and there's that rush of excitement, and you do your first draft of whatever it is and you're like, okay, I'm ready for this next step. And it's and you share it a little bit too early, it's not quite cooked yet. And if you'd maybe given yourself time to take a couple more passes at it, it would have just a few more hooks in it, so that that random person whose desk it finally lands on, it can snag their attention. And I think revision is your friend. And when you get notes, don't be afraid to like, notes are always insulting at first. It's just, you can't help it. So just like take that day, take that walk, work through those feelings, and then go back to the note and see if there actually is something there. Because oftentimes, if you let yourself be open to it, it can push you further into your work in a good way. Guess that would be my advice.
Yeah,
Keep revising and don't be afraid to take notes.
yeah, that's great advice, especially considering I'd say at the point I'm at, that's advice that even I would need to take. So thank you for that.
I
And
need to take it too.
thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking to you.